The Search for the Black Elf Stone. Chapter 8. After leaving Bremen, Tay Trefenwood proceeded west along the Myrmidon, through the mountains that form the southern arm of the Dragon's Teeth. Sunset arrived, and he camped for the night, still within their shelter, then set out again at daybreak. The new day was clear and mild, last night's winds having swept the land clean, the sun dazzling. The elf worked his way down out of the foothills to the grasslands below the Strellerheim and prepared to cross. Ahead he could see the forests of the Westland and beyond, their tips coated in white, the peaks of the Roxburgh. Arbelon was another day's walk, so he travelled at a leisurely pace, his thoughts occupied by all that had happened since Bremen's arrival at Paranor. Tay Trefenwood had known Bremen for almost 15 years, longer even than Riska. He had met him at Paranor before his banishment. Tay, newly arrived from Arbelon, a druid in training. Bremen had been old even then, but with a harder edge to his personality and a sharper tongue as well. Bremen in those days had been a firebrand burning with truths, self-evident to him but incomprehensible to everyone else. The druids at Paranor had dismissed him as being just the sight of mad. Carly Reese and one or two others valued his friendship and listened patiently to what he had to say, but the rest mostly looked for ways to avoid him. Not Tay. From the first moment they met, Tay had been mesmerized. Here was someone who believed it was important, even necessary, to do more than talk about the problems of the Forelands. It wasn't sufficient simply to study and converse on issues. It was necessary to act on them as well. Bremen believed that the old ways were better, that the druids of the First Council had been right in involving themselves in the progress of the races. Non-involvement was a mistake that would end up costing everyone dearly. Tay understood and believed like Bremen. He studied the old lore, the ways of the fairy creatures, and the uses of magic in the old world before the Great Wars. Like Bremen, he accepted that power once subverted was twice as deadly, and that the rebel druid Bronar lived on in another form and would return again to subvert the Forelands. It was an unpopular and dangerous view, and in the end it cost Bremen his place among the druids. But before that happened, he made an ally of Tay. The two formed an immediate bond, and the older man took the younger for his pupil, a teacher with a store of knowledge so vast that it defied cataloguing. Tay did the tasks and completed the studies that were assigned him by the council and his elders. But his spare time and enthusiasm were reserved almost exclusively for Bremen. Though exposed from an early age to the peculiar history and lore of their race, few of the elves at Paranor who had taken up the druid pledge were as open as Tay to the possibilities that Bremen suggested. But then few were as talented. Tay had begun to master his magic skills even before he arrived at Paranor, but under Bremen's tutelage, he progressed so rapidly that soon no one, save his mentor, was his equal. Even Riska, after his arrival, never reached the level that Tay attained, too wedded perhaps to his martial skills to embrace fully the concept that magic was an even more potent weapon. Those first 5 years were exciting ones for the young elf, and his thinking was shaped irrevocably by what he learned. Most of the skills he mastered and the knowledge he gained, he kept secret, forced to do so by the druid band against personal involvement in the use of magic except as an abstract study. Bremen thought the band foolish and misguided, but he was in the minority, always, and at Paranor the council's decisions governed all, so Tay studied privately the lore that Bremen was willing to share, keeping it close to his heart and concealed from others' eyes. When Bremen was exiled and chose to travel west to the Elves to pursue his studies there, Tay asked to go too, but Bremen said no, not forbidding but requesting that he reconsider. Risker was of like mind, but for both there were more important tasks. The old man argued. Stay at Paranor and be my eyes and ears. Work to master your skills and to persuade others that the danger of which I have warned is real. When it is time for you to leave, I will come back for you. So he had, 5 days earlier. And Tay and Risker and the young healer Merith had escaped in time. But the others, all those he had tried to convince, all those who had doubted and scorned, probably had not. Tay did not know, for certain of course, but he felt in his heart that the vision Bremen had revealed to them had already come to pass. It would be days before the elves could verify the truth, but Tay believed that the Druids were gone. Either way, his leaving with Bremen marked the end of his time at Paranor. Whether the Druids were dead or alive, he would not return now. His place was out in the world, doing the things that Bremen had argued that they must do if the races were to survive. The Warlock Lord had come out of hiding, revealed to those who had eyes to see and instincts to heed, and he was coming south. The Northland and the Trolls were already his, and now he would attempt to subjugate the other races. So each of them, Bremen, Risker, Mareth, Kinson, Ravenlock, and himself, must be held accountable. Each must stand and fight on what ground was given. His was the Westland, his home. He was returning for the first time in almost 5 years. His father had died in that time. His younger brother had married and moved into the Sarandanan. His sister's second child had been born. Lives had changed while he was away, and he would be coming back into a world different from the one he had left. More to the point, he would be bringing change to it that dwarfed anything that had occurred in his absence. It was the beginning of change for all the lands, and there were many who would not welcome it. He would not be well received when it was known why he had come. He would have to approach things cautiously. He would have to choose his friends and his ground well. But Tay Treppenwood was good at that. He was an affable, easygoing man who cared about the problems of others and had always done his best to give what help he could. He was not confrontational like Risker or stubborn like Bremen. While at Paranor, he had been genuinely liked, even given his association with the other two. Tay was governed by strong beliefs and of unmatched work ethic, but he did not hold himself up to others as an example of how to be. Tay accepted people as they were, isolating what was good and finding ways to make use of it. Even Athabasca had not quarrelled with him, seeing in Tay what he hoped was hidden, even in the most troublesome of his friends. Tay's big hands were as strong as iron, but his heart was gentle. No one ever mistook his kindness for weakness, and Tay never let the first suggest the second. Tay knew when to stand his ground and when to yield. He was a conciliator and a compromiser of the first order, and he would need those skills in the days ahead. He ran over the list of what he must accomplish, laying each item one by one. He must persuade his king, Cortan Balandaric, to mount a search for the Black Elf Stone. He must also persuade his king to send his armies in support of the dwarves. He must convince him that the Four Lands were about to be altered by circumstances and events in a way that would change them irrevocably and forever. He strode across the open grassland, thinking of what this meant, heading north and west toward the forestlands that marked the eastern boundary of his country. Smiling easily, whistling a tune, he did not yet know how he was going to accomplish any of this, but that didn't matter. He would find a way. Bremen was counting on him. Tay did not intend to let him down. The daylight hours slipped away and the sun passed west into the distant mountains and disappeared. Tay left the Myrmidon at the edge of the westland forest below the Pycon and turned north. Because it was night and he could no longer see well on the flat, he stayed within the concealment of the trees as he continued on. His skills as a druid aided him. Tay was an elementalist, a student of the ways in which magic science interacted to balance the principal components of his world: earth, air, fire, and water. He had developed an understanding of their symbiosis, the ways in which they related to each other, the ways they worked together to maintain and further life, and the ways they protected each other when disturbed. Tay had mastered the rules for changing one to the other, or using one to destroy the other, or using any to give life to another. His talents had grown quite specialized. He could read movement and detect presence from the elements. He could sense thoughts on a broad basis. He could reconfigure history and predict the future. It wasn't the same as having a vision. It wasn't linked to the dead or to the spiritual. It was tied instead to earth laws, to the power lines that encircled the world, and tied all things together with a linkage of acts and counteracts, of cause and effect, of choice and consequence. A stone thrown into a still pond produced ripples. So too, everything that happened to shift the world balance, no matter how small, resulted in change. Tay had learned to read those changes and to intuit what they meant. So now, as he walked in the shadow of the forest night, he read in the movement of the wind and the smells still clinging to the trees and the vibrations born on the surface of the earth, that a large party of gnomes had passed this way earlier and now waited somewhere ahead. He tasted their presence more strongly the further along he went. He eased deeper into the trees, listening for them, reaching down periodically to touch the earth in search of their lingering body heat, the magic that served him rising within his chest in small, feathery trailers that flowed out to his fingertips. Then he slowed and went still, sensing something new. He held himself perfectly still, waiting. A chill settled deep inside, an unmistakable warning of what it was that he had sensed, or what it was that approached. A moment later it appeared in the sky overhead, just visible through breaks in the trees. One of the winged hunters, the skull bearers that served the warlock lord. It soared slowly, heavily across the velvet back, hunting, but not for anything in particular. Tay held himself in place, resisting the natural impulse to bolt, calming himself so that the other could not detect him. The skull bearer circled and came back, winged form hanging against the stars. Tay slowed his breathing, his heartbeat, his pulse. He disappeared into the still darkness of the forest. Finally the creature moved on, flying north, to join those it commanded. Tay reasoned it was not a good sign that the warlock lord's minions were this far south, daring to nudge up against the kingdom of the elves. It strengthened the likelihood that the druids were no longer perceived as a threat. It suggested that the long-anticipated invasion of the warlock lord was at hand. He took a deep breath and held it. What if Bremen had been wrong and the invasion was to be directed not at the dwarves, but at the elves? He mulled over the possibility as he proceeded on, still searching for the gnomes. He found them 20 minutes later, camped within the fringe of dry wood. There were no fires in the camp and sentries at every turn. The skull bearer circled overhead, a raiding party of some sort, but Tay could not imagine what they were after. There was not much to raid this close to the grasslands, save a few isolated homesteads, and the intruders would hardly be interested in those. Still, It was not comforting to find Eastland gnomes, let alone a skull-bearer this far west and so close to Abalon. He eased ahead until he could see them clearly, watched them for a time to see if he could detect anything, failed in his attempt, took a careful head count, and eased away again. He retraced his steps a safe distance, found a secluded stand of fir, crawled beneath the sheltering boughs and fell asleep. It was morning when he woke, and the gnomes were gone. He checked carefully for them from within his shelter, then emerged and walked to their camp. Their footprints led west into Drewood. The skull-bearer had gone with them. He debated going after them, then decided against it. He had enough to deal with at this point without taking on anything else. Besides, where there was one raiding party, there were likely others, and it was important to alert the elves to their presence as quickly as possible. So Tay continued north, staying back within the trees, his long strides eating up the distance. It was not yet noon when he reached the Valley of Ren and turned west down its long, broad corridor. The Ren was a doorway to Abalon and the west, and the elves would be at watch at its far end. The eastern exposure was inviting, a gentle stretch of grasslands spread between two clusters of low foothills. But the valley quickly narrowed. The floor sloped upwards and the hills rose to become steep bluffs. By the time you reached the other end, you were looking into the jaws of a vice. The Wren provided the elves with a natural defensive position against an army approaching from anywhere east. Because the forest was thick and the terrain mountainous coming down from the north or up from the south, the Wren was the only way into or out of the Westland for any sizable force. It was always guarded, of course, and Tay knew that he would be met. He didn't have to wait long. He was barely halfway down the valley's green corridor when elven horsemen thundered out of the pass ahead to challenge him, reining in with shouts of recognition as they neared. The riders knew him, and he was greeted warmly. He was given a horse and taken up through the pass to the elven camp, where the watch commander sent word of his coming to Abalon. He told the commander about the raiding party, mentioning the gnomes, but not the skull-bearer, preferring to save that information for Balandaric. The commander had received no report of gnomes, and immediately dispatched riders south to make a search. The commander then ordered food and drink for Tay and sat with him while he ate, answering his questions about Abalon and bringing him up to date on events about which he asked. The talk was casual and passed quickly. There were rumours of troll movements on the Strellerheim, but nothing definite. No sightings had been reported this far south. Tay avoided mention of anything concerning the Warlock Lord or Paranor. When he was done with his meal, he asked to go on. The commander provided him with a horse and a two-man escort. He accepted the former, declined the latter, and was on his way once more. He rode from the valley toward Abalon, lost in thought. Rumours, no sighting, ghosts and shadows. The Warlock Lord was as elusive as smoke. But Tay had seen the skull-bearer and the gnomes, and Bremen had seen the Warlock Lord at his safehold in the Northland, and they were real enough. Bremen seemed certain of what was about to happen, so now it was up to Tay to find a way to persuade the elves that it was so. The road he followed wound through the westland forest with serpentine precision, avoiding the thick stands of old growth, settling past small lakes and a long winding stream, rising and falling with the lay of the land. Sunlight dappled the woods, streaking the tall trunks and stands of tiny wildflowers, long fingers of light amid the shadows. Like banners and pennants, they welcomed Tay Treffenwood home again. The elf shrugged off his cloak in response, feeling the sun fall like a warm mantle across his broad shoulders. He encountered other travellers on the roadway, men and women journeying between villages and homes, traders and craftsmen bound for jobs in other places. Some nodded or waved in greeting, some simply passed them by. But all were elves, and he had not been in a place where the people were his own for a long time. It seemed strange to him now. So many like himself, and no others. He was nearing Abalon in the languid, slow hours of mid-afternoon. The heat of the late spring day heavy and insistent. Even within the cool forest, when a horseman appeared ahead of him, the newcomer rode out of a shimmer of light at the crest of a rise and bore down on him at a gallop, his cloak whipping and his hair blowing. One hand waved vigorously and a riotous cry of greeting broke the silence. Tay knew him at once. A huge smile widened on his face, and he waved back eagerly, bearing his own mount ahead. The two met in a swirling cloud of dust, reining in their horses and jumping down to embrace each other. Tay Trefenwood, as I live and breathe. The newcomer wrapped his arms around the tall, lanky Tay and lifted him like a child, swinging him once about and then setting him down again with a grunt. "Shay," he roared, "you must do nothing but eat while you're away. You're as heavy as any horse." Tay clasped his best friend's hand. "It isn't me who's growing heavy, it's you who's grown weak. Lay about." The other's hand tightened in response. "Welcome home, anyway. I have missed you." Tay stepped back for a good long look. Like all those he had left behind in Avalon, it had been 5 years since he had seen Jerle Shannara. He had missed Jerle the most, he supposed, even more so than the members of his family, for this was his oldest friend, his constant companion while they were boys growing up together in the Westland. The one person to whom he could tell anything, the one to whom he would entrust his life. The bonds had been formed early, and he had survived even the years the two had spent apart while Tay was at Paranor, and Jerle had remained behind. Cortin Balandaric's first cousin, his service to the throne, predetermined from his birth. Jerle Shannara was born a warrior. He was physically imposing for an elf, big and strong-limbed, with cat-quick reflexes that belied his size, and a fighter's instinct. He was training with weapons almost from the time he could walk, in love with combat, enthralled by the excitement and challenge of battle. But there was a great deal more to him than strength and size. He was quick. He was cunning. He was a relentless adversary. His work ethic was prodigious. He never expected less from himself than the best he had to offer, no matter the importance of the task, no matter if anyone was there to see. But most of all, Jerle Shannara was fearless. It was in his blood or in the way he grew, or perhaps in both. But Tay had never known his friend to back down from anything. They made an odd pair, he reflected, of similar size and look, both larger than average, blonde and long-limbed, and reared with high expectations from their families. They were nevertheless entirely different. Tay was easygoing and always the compromiser in difficult situations. Jerle was quick-tempered and confrontational and maddeningly unwittingly to back down in any dispute. Tay was cerebral, intrigued by difficult questions and complicated puzzles that challenged and confused. Jerle was physical, preferring the challenge of sports and combat, relying on quick answers and intuition. Tay always knew he wanted to travel and study with the druids at Paranor. Jerle always knew he wanted to become captain of the Home Guard, the elite unit of Helven hunters that protected the king and his family. They were different personalities with different intents and goals, yet something of who and what they were bound them together as surely as ties of blood or the dictates of fate. "So you're back," Jerle announced, releasing Tay and stepping clear. He brushed at his curly blonde hair with one massive hand and gave his friend a rakish smile. "Have you come to your senses at last? How long will you stay?" I don't know, but I won't be going back to Paranor. Things have changed." The other smiled dim. "Is that so? Tell me about it." "All in good time, but let me do it in my own way. I'm here for a specific purpose. Bremen sent me." Then it must be serious indeed. Jerle knew the Druid from his time in Avalon. He paused. Does it involve this creature they call the Warlock Lord? You were always quick. Yes, it does. He marches south with his armies to attack the dwarves. Did you know? There are rumours of troll movement on the Strellerheim. We thought they might march west against us. The dwarves first, you later. I'm sent to persuade Cortin Ballandarrick to send the elves to lend their support. I will need help in this, I expect. Jerle Shannara reached for his horse's rein. Let's move off the roadway and sit in the shade while we talk. Do you mind if we don't continue on to the city just yet? I would rather speak to you alone first. Ah, good. You look more like your sister every time I see you. They walked their mounts into the trees and tied them to a slender ash. That's a compliment, you know. I know, Tay smiled. How is she? Happy, settled, content with her family? Jerle gave him a wistful look. She did well enough without me after all. Kira was never for you. You know that as well as I. Look at how you live. What would you do in her life? What would she do in yours? You have nothing in common but your childhood. Jerle snorted. That's true of us as well, yet we remain close. Close, but not married, and it's different with us. Tay settled himself on the grass, long legs folded before him. Jerle hunkered down on a stump worn smooth by time and weather, and looked at his boots as if he had never seen them before. His sun-browned hands were crisscrossed with white scars and small red nicks and scratches. Tay could not remember a time when they hadn't looked like that. Are you still captain of the Home Guard? He asked his friend. Jerle shook his head. I'm considered too important for that these days. I am Cortin's chief advisor in military matters, his de facto general, second-guessing all the real generals. Not that it matters much just now, since we're not at war with anyone. But I suppose all that could change. Couldn't it? Bremen believes that the Warlock Lord will attempt to subjugate the other races, beginning with the dwarves and then moving on. The troll army is powerful. If the races do not join together to stand against it, they will be overwhelmed, one by one. But the Druids won't let that happen. Moribund as they are these days, no offence, Tay, they wouldn't stand still for that. Bremen thinks that Paranor has fallen and the Druids have been destroyed. Jerle Shannara straightened slightly, his mouth tightening in response to the news. When did this happen? We've heard nothing. A day or two ago at most. Bremen went back to Paranor to make certain, but sent me to Avalon, so I can't be sure. It would help if you would send someone to see if it's true before I speak with the king. Someone dependable. I will do that. The other shook his head slowly. All the Druids are gone? All of them? All but Bremen, myself, a dwarf named Risker, and a young woman from Storlock, who is still in training. We left Paranor together before the attack. Maybe someone else escaped later. Jerle gave him a sharp look. So you've come back to warn us, to tell us of Paranor's fall and to ask for help against the Warlock Lord and his troll armies. And one thing more. One very important thing. This is where I need your help the most, Jerle. There is a black elfstone, a magic of great power. This elfstone is more dangerous than all the others, and it has been hidden since the time of Fairy and the Breakline. Bremen has uncovered clues as to where it might be found, but the Warlock Lord and his creatures search for it as well. We must find it first. I intend to ask the king to mount an expedition, but he might be more disposed to grant to grant the request if it came from you. You'll laugh. A big booming howl. Is that what you think? That I can help? It wouldn't stand too close to me if I were you. I've stepped on Kultan's toes a time or two of late, and I don't think he holds me in very high regard at the moment. Oh, he likes my advice on troop movement and defensive strategy well enough, but that is about as far as it goes. His laugh died away, and he wiped at his eyes. Ah, well, I'll do what I can, he chuckled. You make life interesting, Tay. You always did. Tay smiled. Life makes itself interesting, like you. I'm just along for the ride. Jerle Shannara reached across and they clasped hands once more, holding the grip firm for a long moment. Tay could feel the other's great strength, and it seemed as if he could draw from it something of his own. Still maintaining the grip, he rose to his feet and pulled his friend up with him. We had better get started, he advised. The other nodded, and the smile he offered was bold and confident and filled with mischief. You and me, Tay, he said. The two of us, just like it used to be. This is going to be fun. He meant something else entirely, of course, but Tay Treppenwood supposed he understood.